Okay, we took a quick break here, but what I want to do now, this is got a little bit different direction for us. Um, want you to, I'm going to ask you a series of questions about the kinds of changes that have been occurring in farming over the
Okay.
last few decades, and I want your reflections on each type of change. And we'll start with mechanization. Now, maybe you started when you were just getting into farming. You already had tractors, and the day of the horses was gone. But how much change have you seen in mechanization?
Okay, well, mechanization, that's one of the drivers of modern agriculture, what we look at as modern agriculture today. When I started farming, there were still a few teams of horses in the neighborhood other than the ones that the Amish use, our Amish neighbors had. So that would have been, but they were mostly there for sentimental reasons, not for reasons of production agriculture. So I'm totally a product of the mechanized agriculture, and the change, the main change, the really important change that has come through that mechanization is number one, if you want to talk about mechanization, larger and larger machines and more sophisticated machines to do agricultural work. And as a result of that, the requirement that you have more and more acreage to put that much more expensive machine across or through that expensive machine so that you can pay for the thing. So it's been one of the primary drivers for larger farms and for producers to leave agriculture. So if you can't make that transition, haven't been able to make that transition to the larger and larger operations, as a producer, the only other choice you have is to leave agriculture and go to some other type of employment or retire. So that's essentially one of the essential movers of one of the essential technologies that has changed radically since I began farming.
Tell us about the first tractor. Like, how much did the first tractor you purchased cost? Have any idea now?
Well, it was like $3,000 or $4,000, and that was a International Harvester 450 tractor, which could on a good day pull a 4-bottom plow, which was actually a pretty good sized tractor for 1959. A lot of neighbors had 2-bottom or 3-bottom plows.
50 years later, how much would you be buying a tractor for?
Well, we bought one this spring, which was not a huge, large tractor, and it did not have either. It's a 2-wheel drive tractor, $93,000, and that was one that had a few hours on it. So
A used tractor.
well, it was a demo. It had a
Okay.
few hours, not very many.
Now, how much could that pull? How much can
Oh,
it pull?
well, it would be probably 5 plows. We don't rate tractors by the number of bottoms anymore. They go strictly by horsepower, PTO or drawbar. So
Does the mechanization cause farm fields to get much larger as well?
yes, it has, but well, yeah, it actually has. A lot of fences have disappeared. We've converted from a grain and livestock agricultural economy in this area to almost entirely grain. So the need for fences, boundary fences or field fences, pasture fences has certainly gone down. We still maintain a small cattle herd, so you can see fences around here, but we use electric fences for the most part now because they're easier to maintain and cheaper to install and very effective about keeping the livestock where they belong.
Well, that's the perfect segue to my next revolution in farming, electrification.
Electrification? Oh.
And I know your father was big
my
into
goodness.
that.
Well, yes, but that, of course, that for the most part predates my memory, but I can remember that when I was quite young that we still had an ice box on the back porch, even though we had a refrigerator of some type in the kitchen. And we did have all, for as long as I can remember, we've had running water in our homes, but all the neighbors did not. So electrification allows us to do things we hadn't dreamed of. Farmers hadn't dreamed of doing in the past, and again, it was one of the drivers for allowing farms to get larger and to become more efficient. If you could elevate grain from a wagon to a storage bin with electrical horsepower as opposed to horse-driven horsepower, it was in the long run cheaper and it was faster.
Mm-hmm.
And you didn't kill yourself with a scoop shovel.
I imagine that would be very important after a while.
That would be very important.
Maybe that's just the kind of thing you want your kids to do as chores instead of you doing yourself, huh?
Well, they've had their fair share of it, I hope.
How about plant genetics and the increases in yield we've seen because of that?
When I first started farming in 1959, actually 60, when I got back from the reserves, we probably would have some fields of corn that would average 100 bushels the acre. Last year we had a 200 bushel average over all of our acres of corn, which was something like 800 or 900 acres of corn, I guess, which is the first time we've ever had a 200 bushel acres average, by the way. Probably 2/3 of that is due to improved genetics, and it's hard to make that calculation because the improvement in machinery, for instance, planters, corn planters, has been spectacular in the last few years. We can plant now with the planter we currently have in almost any soil conditions and get good seed to soil contact, plant at a constant depth and a constant spacing, and that's a huge driver in improving production. So it's more than, and management. Management skills, another part of it. You've got to make sure that the plant has, corn plant has the right kind of fertility present. Hopefully you can, mostly we depend on Mother Nature for moisture, but things have to fall in place all the way around. Mm-hmm. So management is improved, machinery is improved, genetics improved with livestock too. We've got better quality cattle to choose from and for our breeding herds than we did many years ago.
When you first started farming in 1959, thereabouts, were you buying seed corn, or were you just pulling
we bought seed corn. Dad was in the, actually when Dad started farming, one of the things he had a degree in agronomy, and one of the things that he did was start a small seed corn business, and I've got a seed corn sack back here in the back room that has his logo on it. So we've been using hybrid seed corn on this farm for a long, long time.
Did the introduction of hybrid seed corn, though, and other grains come in the 1930s?
Yes. Let's see. Yeah, it was, hybrid seed corn was available in the late 20s when Dad started farming, and they were produced. That's when all the big genetics companies got their starts, the Pioneers, the DeKalbs, and all those big names. So yes, and it's been readily available since for as long as I can remember, I guess.
Well, the next big category is fertilizers, herbicides, other chemicals.
Well, we couldn't farm. We could probably farm without herbicides, but you'd hate to, and could probably farm without insecticides. But you couldn't farm without, you can't farm in this modern world without proper fertility. And that's one of the things that the early farm bureaus did was put farmers together to buy limestone, cars of limestone, deliver them to the railroad siding in Sullivan, and then organize the crews to come in and literally scoop that stuff off the cars and put it on wagons, and then scoop it again to put it in a little tiny spreader they had in the back of these wagons that drug around the fields. So
is this high acidic soil around here?
For the most part, will require, particularly if you use relatively high rates of nitrogen,
Okay.
It will require a limestone application every probably 8 to 10 years, and somebody's going to jump my bones on that by saying you're not right. But by my experience in our farm, we test all our soils on a 4-year rotation, and most generally you can make an application of lime if you get it on accurately, and it will last the first 4 years and probably the next 4 years, and then after that you're probably going to be thinking about another limestone application.
Well, I would imagine when you started, again, I could be dead wrong on this, but you had these diverse kind of farms where you had a lot of livestock, had hogs or pigs, or hogs or cattle or both, that you're getting the fertilizer on there with manure as much as anything.
Yes. Yeah, you certainly were.
You're laughing because that wasn't your favorite job to
Well,
do?
you had to scoop the stuff out and get it in the spreader, so that's what you had to do. And we had a fair amount of livestock, but with a beef cow herd, they don't spend a lot of time confined in a tight pen, so they spread most of the manure on their own and generally on the pasture. But with the hogs and the feeder calves, which we used to feed, you pretty well had to take care of that by hand until we got a tractor and loader that was a tractor with a loader on it that we could get in there and do it mechanically.
But you're a long ways from those days, are you not?
Well, we don't feed our cattle out anymore. We sell our calves, so the cattle manure generally gets dropped into the pasture, so we don't have to spread that by hand. And we don't have any hogs anymore. We're pretty much grain. So, and if we did have a livestock facility, there's all kinds of mechanical ways you can handle that now. Some of them even, of course, as you probably know, some of them even use a center pivot irrigation system to spread the stuff around, and all they have to do is open a valve and push a button and the thing.
So how are you fertilizing to get 200 bushel per acre?
By commercial nitrogen, and in our case be anhydrous ammonia. Diammonium phosphate is a source for phosphorus, and small amount of nitrogen, and potash is a source of potassium.
Do you mix those and spread them at the same time?
The anhydrous ammonia is a liquid under pressure. It vaporizes at atmospheric pressure, so you have to confine it in a pressurized tank, and we inject that, generally speaking, in the fall through a dedicated machine for that purpose. And then
that you're renting?
We own our own applicator, but the tanks that they deliver to the farm with are owned by the cooperatives, so we have to pay for the use of those tanks as well as for the anhydrous ammonia. And just parenthetically, I might add that, let me finish on the discussion on how we apply it. The dry fertilizer, which is the DAP, diammonium phosphate, and the potash, K2O, potassium oxide, are applied by commercial spreaders through our cooperative F&M Clay Service Company. Give them a plug. So they apply the fertilizer for us based on the analysis that we want. Excuse me. And then what was I going to reflect on? This fall, best of my knowledge, diammonium phosphate, one of the dry ingredients, price is $999 a ton. Potash, or potassium oxide, the potassium source, is $795 a ton. And the last I checked, anhydrous ammonia is $1,111 a ton. Substantial increases over last fall.
Mm-hmm. How much does that have to do with the cost of a barrel of oil right now?
Just about everything.
For all three of them?
Well, transportation is a huge cost for all those ingredients. But in the case of anhydrous ammonia, it's manufactured from natural gas, and natural gas can be transported by a pipeline, and there is an anhydrous ammonia pipeline that has I think 2 terminals here in Illinois. Potash, potassium oxide potash is largest deposits are in Canada, so it has to be railed to central Illinois, and the most extensive potash or phosphate, which is a source of diammonium phosphate, is down in Florida. So again, it's a long haul to get it all here.
Well, this is all a far cry from hog manure and spreading it in the fields, isn't it?
Yes, it is. But you wouldn't want to have to rely on hog manure for all your nutrients now, because there's not enough hog manure to do that.
Yeah. Are you applying this, varying the amounts that you're applying as you go through fields?
Oh, yes.
How does that happen?
Okay. There's two ways of doing that. For the most part, we spread a uniform rate over the entire field, with the exception of limestone. And whenever I take soil maps or soil samples, or whenever we have soil samples taken, we try to have as accurate maps as you can get. And since the limestone requirements to meet to raise pH requires in the neighborhood of thousands to tons of limestone per acre, you spread that at a very high rate. On the other hand, the DAP and potash rates are like 300 to 350 pounds per acre total tops, and that would be a high rate. So I can miss a little ways with limestone and not worry too much, but you really don't want to go wrong on so I can go out and direct them, say soil sample number 1, number 2, and number 3 need 3 tons per acre. The rest of the field, a ton and a half per acre, or 2 tons. But on my soil sample maps aren't accurate enough that I just take by hand. There's technology out there now using GPS that enables you to draw the sample from the same spot within a couple of inches every 2 or 4 years, how often you sample. And we've used that technology some, and that they can put a chip in the little computer in the truck, and that will spread a variable rate depending on what that chip tells it it needs in every portion of the field. So it can vary the rate from, well, essentially nothing to 200 or 300 pounds per acre. And that variable rate technology, which they call is the moniker for that, VRT, we've used that some, and with the increasing price of fertilizer, we're going to have to be using it more in the future. That's just one of those things that's changing, and we're gonna change. Even us graybeards can change.
There you go. Of all these incredibly important ways that the farms in Illinois and throughout the entire country have been changing. We talked about mechanization, electrification. We talked about genetics. We talked about the application of fertilizers and all of the technology that goes along with that. You mentioned management skills, importance in that. Which one do you think has had the biggest impact?
The biggest impact on productivity or on
the way
yields?
The farmer's life has changed.
The way the farmer's life has changed. Well, the demands of I think people are still the most important ingredient in virtually any enterprise. So the management skills, if you don't have the management skills, and happily most farmers do, you're not going to have a very good life on the farm. And acquiring those management skills is a process of education and then experience, and then more education and then more experience. So if I'm giving, if anybody's looking to this for advice, which they probably shouldn't, go out and get your education and then build your resume with experience if you can, especially working alongside someone that's done all these things. And that's one of the things that I've been fortunate in being able to do.
So what all does it take to be a successful farmer today? What are the skills that you have to bring to the job?
Well, I should have mentioned financing. You better have a friendly banker, or marry a wealthy woman, or
that always helps.
Some source of funding, because well, just based on it's going to cost our operation. And I haven't calculated what it's going to cost for the fields we're going to have to take soil samples on, because I don't know how much we're going to put on. But it's just for the nitrogen, the phosphorus, and the potash this fall. It's going to cost our operation $154,000. And
for how many acres?
Well, this is applications on what is it? About 1,700 acres. Some fields don't require any. Some require substantial amounts. Some just a little bit. So I just figured that up. The reason I can remember that, I just figured it up.
That's why the financial side is so uppermost
And
in your mind right now.
You need to find somebody that either a source for the financing. Either you can self-finance if you've been in the business long enough, and we're fortunate that we can mostly self-finance. But price of nitrogen, prices of seed, which one seed company has already sent me a letter. They're going to have to increase they didn't say how much, price of their seed substantially this year, because of the demand for their seed has increased so much. We're going to have to increase our production capacity. So now I'm wondering if they're going to send me some stock when I pay for more of that seed. And all the inputs and fuel, actually fuel in percentage terms has gone up probably less than the other inputs that we rely on so much. Electricity hadn't gone up all that much, some, but no, I said that wrong. Chemicals have gone up less than fuel and seed and fertilizer. The other inputs.
I would guess, though, you're stressing the importance of having a good banker and having a good sense about the finances of things for running the business, but you also have to be real smart on the opposite end, and when you can market and how you market your grain.
Well, I don't pretend.
Hopefully, you're better than Wall Street's been lately.
I don't pretend to be smart. I'm very smart about it. I'm a very smart marketer, but it certainly helps, especially when you have volatile markets like we've had this year. And unfortunately, fortunately or unfortunately, there are a lot of advisory services out there that are willing to help a farmer decide when to
for a fee.
For a fee. and I don't have the privilege of seeing all the advisory services recommendations, but unfortunately the ones that I have seen have not done real well about pricing the 2008 crop. Most of them missed a lot of the price increase because of their desire to get crops, which is not necessarily bad, to price your crops ahead of harvest, which is not a bad strategy, but in 2008 they did not foresee what turned out to be a very, very strong bull market, the strongest bull market since I started farming in 19.
Mm-hmm.
And we, I'm not bragging about myself either, because we didn't do as good a job as we could have done, or should have done, or would have liked to have done. That's it.
Well, again, this is an interesting time, because right now the stock market is definitely in bull market territory, but as we know, the commodity prices for almost everything, to include grain, soybeans and corn, and those kinds of things that you worry about and deal about, that's what you're saying is quite the bull market right now.
It is, and corn and soybeans to some extent are a product of what's going on, and I don't think we realize that as much as we should have. Product of what's going on in the crude oil market. So, or product, they follow the crude oil market.
Well, I wanted to change gears here and talk a little bit about your experience with the Illinois Farm Bureau, and once we get that territory established, then we're going to go through some of the issues that you've dealt with. So how did you come to start working with the Illinois Farm Bureau? Maybe that's kind of an obvious question with your dad's background.
It was inherited. Actually, you kind of get motivated to do things. That's one of the advantages, or maybe disadvantages, getting a little more education, and one of the advantages of having a family that has been out there doing things for generations, actually. So I never even gave it any thought. I had an opportunity to serve on our farm supply company board of directors early on, and probably started in 1963 or 4, and I think I stayed on that board probably longer than I should have. I know it was over 10, maybe 15 years. I was elected president at one time, and decided that I'd been there long enough, and I retired from that board. And it wasn't too long after that that my county farm bureau township director passed away, and someone asked me if I would be interested in the job, and I said yes, and stayed on that board several years, and was elected. I think I served as secretary and president for several years. And once you get elected president of the county farm bureau, you kind of move up a step, because you get invited to go to, and are expected, or they hope you'll attend statewide meetings that involve other county farm bureau leaderships, as well as that's not counting the annual meeting, which they hold in either Chicago or St. Louis. And turned out that when I got involved in this county farm bureau president, that I already knew a lot of people because of associations I'd had, either through my involvement with the local service company or through college people that were already involved in farm bureau work, and it wasn't hard to fall in, be attracted to to those activities. And I decided when an opportunity arose to run for district director, I decided I'd run for it, and had the good luck to be elected director. Probably some of my constituents wondered what they had done. Anyway, I got elected director, and I think it was 95, but I'm not sure.
And how long did you serve in that position?
10 years.
So it hasn't been that long you stepped away from that.
No, it hadn't been all that long ago.
Well, I wanted to go through some of the issues that were especially prevalent during that time, and I'm sure they continue on today, and give you an opportunity to discuss some more issues that I might have missed. Mandatory livestock identification.
Oh, you're starting with a goodie.
Yeah.
Country of origin labeling, or what? Cool. Is that what you're wanting to?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh boy. Yeah, nothing like starting with the hard one. I'll talk about Illinois first briefly, and the situation in Illinois is regard to COOL, or mandatory livestock, whatever you want to call it.
What does COOL stand for again?
Country of origin labeling.
Okay.
COOL. Mandatory COOL, I should say. Illinois is not the huge livestock state that other states are, and Illinois does not have, in particular, a huge beef cattle herd. So in Illinois Farm Bureau, it was relatively easy to get, I don't want to say consensus, but a majority in favor of supporting mandatory country of origin labeling. And the rationale, and I support it too, even though it's an intrusion of into agriculture of the federal government, essentially. But the problem we have in livestock in Illinois and around the country is maintaining and growing our export side of our livestock, as well as maintaining a safe food supply for our own population. So, how do you, when there are diseases out there like foot and mouth and a whole variety of other diseases that can negatively impact your ability to export livestock or to feed your own population, you need some way to have traceability back to the farm where the disease started. And we're, in the United States, we're far behind the curve that other countries have established and require, so we really need to catch up. And it's one of those things that government can do that no one else is going to be able to do in an effective way, or do it as cheap as the government can do. That said, we in Illinois, we have some language, and I forget exactly how it goes, but we support country of origin labeling. I think the language does not specify mandatory or voluntary, but we support it. In AFBF, has been and continues to be a huge discussion. And last I knew, mandatory COOL is opposed by AFBF. I don't recall whether that's still the fact or not.
Well, I know there's huge markets that are at play here. There's the Japanese and the Korean market.
Certainly are.
Where they're not producing a lot of beef of their own. That's the perfect target market, and yet, well, right now Korea is really objecting because there's 1 or 2 cases of mad cow disease, and we don't have the country of origin labeling process going on.
I know it.
They're blocking out everything. So here's my quick question for you.
Okay.
What would your dad's opinion on this be?
I think, well, I'd like to think he would agree with me that this is a role that federal government can handle and do better than anyone else can do it, and that's to congregate all that information that COOL could provide. And that said, the National Cattlemen's Beef Association is the strongest opponent of mandatory livestock identification in this country, and
why?
For reasons that I fail to understand, except that most of those folks are from west of the Mississippi River, and they consider themselves free, and we're cattlemen. You can't mess with us, and probably a lot
The
of them.
government doesn't need to be sticking their nose in
They
our
don't.
business.
I don't want them looking around in my pickup truck, and I don't want them knowing how many cattle I've got or where they're.
Well, and
where I
everything
sell 'em.
you've told me and that Janet's told me about your father, those are echoes of your father's voice and getting government out of the market forces.
But see, that's not part of the market forces.
Okay.
That's part. Cool is the way I look at it. Is that cool is a way of. And by the way, I never said I didn't want government. No government.
Okay.
No government involved in markets. I don't think. What I do want is to government to provide the regulation that is required to have a free and open market. And in the case of livestock, I think cool is part of that question. In the case of, say, the mortgage market, I think the government needs, obviously, this is just, the government needed to play a more active role than they did in the regulation and oversight. So government does have a role, and I think Dad would agree with that. Let's see, tuberculosis vaccinations are a requirement for the dairy industry, as I recall. If you're going to sell dairy products to a dairy, you've got to have a TB free herd, right? So the government's there for in that case, but anyway.
Well, let's get to another controversy here, and I apologize for perhaps painting with too broad a brush there.
Okay.
Federal crop insurance.
Well, federal crop insurance wouldn't exist were it not for the federal government. Obviously, look at the name. They do provide a subsidy. Those subsidies are, at this point, probably necessary or no farmer would buy them. So as long as we've got, there's two kind of separate issues that are kind of bumped together here. Federal government subsidizing crop insurance. They're also providing subsidies for agriculture through the countercyclical price payments and through the direct payments. You know, when's enough enough? We should have a requirement in there that requires if you don't buy federal crop insurance, you don't get direct payments. You know, you need to link those kind of things and cut down on the amount of government intervention in that way. We take federal crop insurance out in our operation every year, and more people are going to be doing it because of the very thing I talked about earlier, how much it costs to put in an acre of farm land.
Remind me of exactly how the federal crop insurance works. If you have a crop
Okay, I go to an agent. I tell him I want federal crop insurance. He quotes me a price, and that price is based upon a subsidy that the federal government provides the insurance company to get the price down to whatever rate it happens to be. So the insurance companies actually end up collecting the subsidies. I, however, benefit from the subsidy because I get the crop insurance at a lower rate. And I can't recall what it is. And, in the case of, there is a regional bias built into the crop subsidies as well. In Illinois, we pay more in relation to the benefits we get through federal crop than, say, Kansas or Nebraska, some of the western states. They get a heavier subsidy out there, a bigger subsidy than we do. So there's some inequities involved within the federal crop system, as well as the kind of inequity in getting federal payments on one end and then getting a subsidy to insure your crop on the other end.
Is the difference because of there's a greater volatility in Kansas and Nebraska for some of the crops?
Political power in the House and Ag committees has more to do with it than anything. The folks that were in power at that time that this legislation was written wanted to make sure their folks came out well, and they did.
Let's talk about freedom to farm legislation. First, what it means and what would the Illinois Farm Bureau's position on it be?
Freedom to farm.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you've stumped me.
Okay.
Let's go on to
Okay, well, let's move right on. I saw that someplace. Okay, set aside.
Oh, well, we don't have set-asides anymore. That's one of the things that went by the wayside. We can produce anything we want, anywhere we want it nowadays. And if we do have ground that's set aside, there's something out there called conservation CRP, Conservation Reserve Program, that you might call set aside, but that's a permanent contract, and the land has to meet certain requirements as to erodibility or other fragile characteristics. So,
so that land that's now underwater might have fit that category earlier or today.
Probably not.
Oh, okay.
What would generally meet that category is land like you see out my dining area window there to the southwest,
Mm-hmm.
where there's a slope down the hill. That's permanent pasture, so we're not putting that in the CRP program. If we had ever tilled that ground and then taken it out of production, it would be eligible for CRP. And if we were to decide to plow it up tomorrow and farmed it for a year, then we could come back, or maybe it's 2 years, and put it in the Conservation Reserve Program and get a payment for it.
Can you think of any other controversies that you'd like to discuss that you dealt with quite a bit during your years with the Illinois Farm Bureau?
Well, there's a lot of internal issues within an organization like Farm Bureau. You're always dealing with those, and sometimes it's between the state organization and the AFBF, and sometimes it's within the state organizations itself. Illinois Farm Bureau, like many other farm bureaus, owns an insurance company. I'm sure you're aware, and as a member of the Illinois Farm Bureau Board of Directors, I was also a member of the Country Insurance and Financial Services Board of Directors, and sometimes there are conflicts that arise because of our involvement in that. Essentially, what is a profit-making venture? But those are more internal conflicts, and we try pretty hard not to get a lot of publicity when you have some of those.
Yeah.
Keep them kind of quiet.
I understand.
But you've hit the country of origin labeling, in my view, is the nut that's going to be awful tough to crack, based on my knowledge of the players that are involved in that issue.
Did you step down in 2005 then from being a district
I
president?
think it was.
And
Well, now, see, I would have been elected in at the IAA annual meeting, which is held in December of every year.
Okay.
So, and my replacement would have been elected in December of 2019. I think I was elected in December of 1995, so I would have been my replacement elected in 2005. So it was December of 2005. So
Okay.
actually, 2006, 7, and this year have been.
well, and I hope I get this right. I understand that you are, or were after you retired from this position, the chair of the Governor's Advisory Council of Farmers and Farm Families.
Oh, why did you bring that up? Yes, that would be correct.
Okay. And that works at the governor's guidance, if you will?
We are, well, as there's what we thought it was going to be and what it's actually turned out to be are two different things.
Okay.
Julie Curry, you may remember her, or some people may
Right.
remember her, was my state representative and then later senator for many years, and a good friend. And she knew I was interested in agriculture, and she got a job with the administration and retired from the Senate, Illinois Senate, and became one of his administrative folks.
His being Rod Blagojevich?
Rod Blagojevich, I'm sorry. Yeah. And shortly after that, she called and asked if I would be interested in serving on an advisory committee for the Agricultural Advisory Committee for the governor, and I jumped at that chance. Thought it would be a good one, good idea. But since we've been organized, we have sometimes met twice a year, sometimes met once a year, and last year didn't meet at all. And don't expect we'll be called in to meet again. And Julie Curry is no longer working for the governor's office, so
not necessarily the most effective or efficient organization?
No, and they never really asked for our advice, although the last meeting we offered lots of advice, and which I presume the governor heard, but I have no first-hand knowledge that he did.
Okay. Well, let's just finish off with a couple broader questions that maybe will be more fun for you to know on a little bit. What do you see as the future of farming in Illinois?
Well, I'm very optimistic about farming in Illinois. We've got one of the best climates for agricultural production anywhere in the world. We've got some of the best soils available anywhere in the world. We've got a strong infrastructure in place, not that it doesn't need improvement in places, and that's one of those issues that we used to talk about in Farm Bureau, is the locks and dam issues in Illinois. And we've got an educational system that through both extension and through the local education can provide education for our citizens, our farmer citizens, that is probably second to none anywhere in the world. So if we can't make a go of that, something's going to be pretty wrong in the future. All we've got to do is to make sure that the folks that have the skills and the resources to make a farming operation run are the ones that get in place to run those farm operations.
Well, we didn't talk much about your children. You have children in farming.
I have two sons, Eric and Scott. Eric being the oldest, Scott a little younger. Scott came back, my youngest son came back to the farm in this June, and he's starting his, hasn't finished a full year as a farmer. He spent several years after graduating from college working in the grain trade, as well as for livestock packing facility, and has recently been married and has a stepdaughter, and they live right across the road. Just delighted that they're back. And my older son actually has been involved in farming since he in this farming operation since he graduated, almost entirely. For a while he worked as a hired hand, I guess, and now he's a partner in the operation. And we operate a family partnership. I farm with I'm retired officially, by the way. I retired. I haven't been retired for quite 2 full years yet, but I am retired, and so I used to farm with my twin brother and I farmed together, and then Eric came into the operation, and now Scott's in the operation, and before Scott showed up, I'd actually retired. So there's.
Do you have any grandsons yet?
I have one grandson. He's a freshman in high school.
Okay.
So
what happens when, what's his name?
Chance.
Okay. Now, maybe this conversation has happened. Maybe Chance has a different future in mind, but what happens if 4 years from now he comes to you and he says, "Grandpa, what do you think about going into farming? What do you think? Would that be a good idea for me to do that?" What would you tell your grandson?
I'd tell him that yes, it would be a good idea. He'll be driving up, by the way, in this Corvette that he wants. So you got to watch that. But
And then the next question is, but what do I need to do to get ready to do that?
oh, well, I'll go back to what I said earlier. Finish your education. First, you got to finish your education. And the more of that you can get, the better off you are. You know, I digress. How much time do we have left?
Go ahead.
I want to tell you about my two uncles, or my two aunts, Dad's sisters, and their husbands. Dad has had two sisters, Mildred and Bernadine. They both went to the University of Illinois and graduated. Both of them were excellent students. Bernadine married a fraternity brother of my father named Homer Curtis. Bernadine, by the way, was probably maybe the smartest person I ever knew, even exceeding my dad's intellectual abilities probably. And Aunt Mildred was just as smart, I think, and she met and married a man that was at the University of Illinois, also a fraternity brother of my father's, and then they both moved back to their farms. Uncle Homer farmed in northern Illinois, in Joe Davis County. Uncle Earl, Mildred's wife, farmed in near Woodstock in McHenry County. Can't think of the name of the county. Of course, Dad farmed down here, and he married a gal that Ida, my mom, who graduated from the University of Indiana. So here's these three siblings. Dad has a master's degree. Bernadine, her husband didn't have a master's degree. He had a Bachelor of Science degree, nor did she have a graduate degree. But Mildred's husband eventually earned a PhD from, oh darn, I can't even think of the name of the school, one of the Eastern schools.
Well, we can get that into the transcript later.
Anyway, these three siblings just, and you know, all three of them, all six of them, the spouses, had good educations, and some of them higher education degrees. I mean, it was just a remarkable
at a
achievement.
time when that wasn't
right
happening at all.
Yeah, and those Uncle Earl and Uncle Homer were both very successful farmers in their own right, and they just fit the pattern for what's needed now.
So this grandson would be getting advice, make sure you finish your school, because that's what it takes to be a successful farmer?
That's what I would tell him. The more education, the more you can use, the better you can use this equipment up here, the better off you're going to be as a farmer. Not that I'm any example, but we've had some limited success. We're doing okay.
I'd say it looks like you're doing just fine. Get to retire and enjoy life now.
Well, yeah, well, some of it.
Paul, do you have any?
I still work just as hard as I ever did, even though
I'm not
retired.
surprised you say that. But you come from a family of hard workers too, don't you?
Pretty much.
What final comments would you have for us then?
Well, agriculture, as you observe, has been good to me, and I hope I've been good to agriculture. I like to think that the place is just as good or better than the farm than I found it when I started farming, and hope it will continue to be productive in the future. You know, we won't do anything without the land. Mm-hmm. That's the important part.
Well, thank you very much, Paul. It's been a real pleasure to talk to you and hear about your own personal story and a little bit more about your father as well.
Thank you.